for Cunningham.
Thank you, Acting Speaker. And I listened with great interest to the member for Bowman's contribution just then. It's not just about saying go out and have a go for 28 days. It's saying to people try and do that with absolutely no money. And that's what the issue is at the heart of this bill. I'd like to see him try to go out and spend 28 days getting dressed, going on the transport system, having to buy lunch while you're out, looking for 28 jobs, but actually having absolutely not a dollar of income to do it on. That's at heart the issue. We don't disagree with many of the principles the member for Bowman outlined in terms of mutual responsibility under these payments, about requiring people to participate and, as he said, to have a go. We just don't believe that it's reasonable or fair to ask people to do that without any form of income support. And not everybody is in as privileged a position as many of us may have been at that age to have family who could support us through that time. And so that's at the heart of why we have these concerns with this bill. The challenge, obviously, and the member for Bowman referred to this quite rightly, there is persistent high youth unemployment across our nation, and in particular in regions like my own in the Illawarra. It is one of the most serious and persistent social and economic issues that we confront. It is clearly the case that one of the flow-on effects across the developed world from the global financial crisis has been its impact on employment opportunities for young people. In Australia, we've seen a serious drying up of entry-level jobs. These are the ones that give the young people a start in the workforce. And this increasingly applies to young people with post-secondary qualifications. It's not only those without any employment-specific education and training who are seeing the opportunities for entry-level jobs dry up right before their eyes. Many young people are telling me, and I'm sure many of my colleagues in this place across both sides of the chamber, that nearly every job they'd like to apply for says an essential criteria is a minimum of 2 or 3 years' experience. That requirement then blocks them from getting a start to get the required minimum experience in the first place. So they end up in this no-win situation where they want to get the experience they need to get a permanent job, but then all the jobs that they are potentially qualified to apply for all require experience. And it's a really persistent problem for them, and I'm sure all my colleagues have heard this from young people who are in the job market. Young people are also increasingly relying on cobbling together multiple jobs or indeed contracts, many of them working on short-term contracts, in order simply to make enough to live on. This type of work then locks them out of reliable or permanent work, and it leaves them precariously attached to the workforce. While sometimes this can lead to a permanent job and after a period of time, but that doesn't seem to be the common experience for many young people. In this context, therefore, I believe it's completely wrong for the government to seek to implement a bill that will only add to the financial stress and difficulty for young people in our communities. This bill introduces a number of social service measures from the 2015 budget relating to both youth allowance and New Start for young people. And I'd just like to briefly outline those before indicating where I stand on the matters before us, but then, more importantly, to discuss the significance of supporting education and training opportunities to assist young people gaining employment. Firstly, the bill seeks to reintroduce the measure from the 2014 budget, which would apply a one-week It seeks to apply the 2014 budget initiative about a waiting period, but with a different time frame proposed in this budget. It seeks to revisit that proposal that required young people under 30 to actively seek work for 6 months before receiving income support payments. This was opposed by the Parliament, and now the government seeks to reintroduce the policy with a reduced period of 4 weeks, and a proposal to delay the introduction of that until the 1st of July 2016. Labor continues to oppose this proposition, as it will leave young job seekers under 25 with nothing to live on for a full month. This would also exacerbate their ability to participate in job-seeking activities, as they would have no income available to them, and therefore it seems particularly short-sighted and a particularly mean proposition. Clearly, this would push young people into poverty and potentially trap them in an endless cycle of no income support at all, thereby increasing poverty, crisis and homelessness. Thirdly, the bill continues the previous budget measure to extend youth allowance other from 22 to 24-year-olds in lieu of New Start and sickness allowance, also simply making life harder for those young people, and we continue to oppose that proposition. Fourthly, the bill proposes to cease the low-income supplement paid as part of the compensation for the carbon price from the 1st of July 2017. This, of course, is a payment that's made to singles and couples on low income. Labor is willing to consider this proposition, but not in the context of the other proposals in this bill. Finally, the bill seeks to reintroduce measures from the 2014 budget on indexation, but with the exclusion of pensions and an amended start date. Specifically, it would maintain at level for 3 years the income-free areas for all working age allowances other than student payments and for parenting payments single from the existing start date of 1 July 2015, and maintain at level for 3 years the income-free area and other means test thresholds of student payments, including the student income bank limits with a start date of 1 January 2016. This measure was opposed by Labor in the context of the 2014 budget, and we continue to oppose it. It's clear the government has actually learnt nothing from the fundamental unfairness of last year's budget. This budget is just as unfair as the last when it comes to young job seekers. This is compounded by the fact that this budget has done nothing to reinstate any of the savage cuts in last year's budget to the skills portfolio, in particular for apprentices and trainees. This, of course, is an important pathway for young people to undertake education and training that would improve their opportunities to gain a job. And let me just recap the extent of the cuts in last year's budget. The government's early action on apprenticeships was to introduce the one initiative they had taken to the election on skills. They introduced their apprentice loan scheme. But we in Labor were quite angry on behalf of apprentices that the government before the election, in outlining this scheme, did not outline to apprentices that it would be at the cost of the Tools for Your Trade payments, which provide direct financial assistance to all eligible apprentices to get the tools they need to assist with their trade and other costs. I'm sure that many members have received the same feedback that I have about the intense disappointment among apprentices about this decision. Last year I visited a construction site in Werribee outside Melbourne with my colleague, the member for Lawler, and we spoke directly to about 20 apprentices across a number of trades. They were all angry about the removal of the Tools for Your Trade payments and, to be honest, quite scathing about the trade support loans as a replacement option. And indeed, in the in-detail budget session last week, the Minister indicated there was only around 24,000 apprentices across the nation had taken up the loan, and given that there are several 100,000 young people in apprentices at any one time, that's a very, very low uptake. And indeed, this morning with the Leader of the Opposition, I visited some apprentices at the Canberra Institute of Technology. I just asked the class, how many of you have actually taken up the trade support loan? There was only one in that class, and all the rest had no interest in undertaking debt. So they clearly missed the impact of providing that Tools for Your Trade. Just as importantly, there were very significant apprenticeship support programs that were abolished in that budget. The first was the Apprentice Access Program. This particularly targeted very disadvantaged young people to get them the skills, the appropriate knowledge, the work culture, as the previous member spoke about, to be prepared to actually be able to undertake an apprenticeship. In November 2012, I visited the MTA Auto Start Access Program in Granville with the member for Parramatta. And I saw firsthand an impressive program that helped people who were very vulnerable job seekers get themselves ready to gain a full apprenticeship. During that visit, I met local car business owners and managers and representatives of the Motor Traders Association. They were all very dedicated to helping young adults get a start in a region plagued by youth unemployment. And they were very proud of the success they were having in transitioning so many of those young people into full apprenticeships. With no notice or evidence that this scheme had any failures, it was simply abolished in the 2014 budget. Another program that was abolished was the apprenticeship mentoring program. Many of my colleagues will be aware there's been a consistent concern about the number of apprentices who are actually completing their training. And this program was very much appreciated not only by apprentices but also by employers. In March of 2013, as the Minister, I launched the construction apprenticeship mentoring scheme with the Master Builders at the ACT Training Centre. And this, as the member said, a very good organisation and one that was very keen to be participating in mentoring of young people in apprenticeships, a really important thing to undertake. It was an $80 million program and it was critically targeted at improving those completion rates. But again, I'm quite at a loss to understand the program was simply abolished in the 2014 budget. We also see cuts across the apprenticeship sector more broadly. The old apprenticeship centres, Australian Apprenticeship Centres, have been rebadged as the Australian Apprenticeship Network. The problem I have with this is that these network providers, they work with apprentices at local levels, are now doing that with $10 million per year less than the old apprenticeship centres had, plus they've been given the job matching and mentoring work that used to happen under other programs. So all up, what would have been $180 million per year, they are being asked to do with less money. So the reality is they're asked to do a lot more work with significantly less money, and so I can only see that with the best will in the world, those new providers are going to really be under the pump to effectively impact both apprentice commencement and apprentice completion rates. In particular, I just want to make the point that one of the areas that is particularly significant in this space is to get small and medium businesses involved in being able to take on apprentices and trainees. Many of them are really keen to do this, but the actual management of an apprenticeship, both the paperwork, the legal requirements, the follow-up with the apprentice and the managing the apprentice is just too much for them to take on, as well as their business responsibilities. And so for many decades they've had the option of the group training program in order to participate in training apprentices. So the group training organisation did all of that work and managed the apprentice who was placed with a particular employer. Sadly, at the end of last year, the government abolished the financing of the joint group training program, which allowed them to do this. So we've seen a lot of slashing in the skills portfolio, at least half of which, around about $1 billion, has been in support for apprentices and trainees in this country. So the government not only has, in bills like the one before us, a very mean approach to dealing with young people who may find themselves unemployed, not have the sorts of family access or extended family who can financially support them for a month, actually being unable to access any income support for that period. At the same time, we're seeing significant cuts across all the sorts of programs that would actually give them the opportunity to get some skills, to get some training, to get some work readiness, to actually improve their ability to get into the labour market, and all this at a time when the labour market is becoming harder and harder for young people trying to get a start. And in particular through those entry-level jobs, as I discussed at the beginning, where anybody can see, we're now seeing increasing reports of university graduates who are struggling to get their first job because they may have their degree, but all the entry-level jobs in the professional area they're looking at all require minimum 2 or 3 years' experience. So it's not just for young people with no post-secondary qualifications. It's increasingly that for those who are graduating from our TAFEs and our RTOs and our universities, all facing this same challenge. And so it just seems to me the government seems to be intent on creating a bit of a perfect storm that's just going to make it more and more difficult. If the OECD recognises youth unemployment is a critical factor for the developed world, I think we should be putting in place decisions and indeed legislation that lead to solutions for that for young people, not put more barriers in their way, as I believe this bill does.
I thank the honourable member for Cunningham.